Hello, dear viewers. Welcome back to another Dream Entry ASMR. Okay, so this time I wanted to do something different. I've been doing a lot of my dreams recently. I've done several now. I'd say like 20 or 24 of them, I think, now. I've done like 3 Dream Entry compilations. But I wanted to do some other people's dreams, and tell some other people's dreams, and I'd gotten on this other subreddit and asked for people's permission on telling some of their dreams. But I wanted to go ahead, because I have a few of them saved here that I wanted to do. I'm going into Reddit. By the way, if you would like to post your own dreams, get onto my subreddit, r// uppercase patches _ dream and then _ entries, and I'll hopefully take you to my page, and I'll probably most likely provide the link in case anybody wants to get on there. Maybe that'll help people to discover it, because I've tried to put that. I've tried to look that up on Reddit myself, and I've noticed that I can't get into it, or I can't find it for some reason. So I'll provide the link in case anybody wants to get on there and post their dreams. But I have a few queued up here that I've saved. I have one here that's really interesting. I wanted to talk about, because it's fairly long and it's a very detailed dream. But it's by Pumpkin Pie Official, or Pumpkin _ Pie _ Official is the user here. And I'll provide a summary after, but it's just a fascinating dream. But okay. Long post. Apologies if there are any spelling mistakes. A couple months ago, I managed to remember a particular dream I had, which was sort of dystopian. Then I had another that was set in the same world. Then another, and so on. In a nutshell, it was a hybrid of Mortal Engines, Snowpiercer, and Mad Max all together. There were 3 dreams, but it was more like 4, as one dream had 2 parts in total that I experienced. Each one had some connection to the last, either by the exact same world features, crucial events, or references to previous dreams. I was able to remember all of them in vivid detail just because of how intricate it was. I find that the more detailed the dreams are, the more likely I am to remember them. This post is an entire ramble on how the world worked, because that's literally how detailed it was. It was a surreal experience. I also remember writing down notes on what I remembered and drew the train I encountered in Dream 1 and 2. As for the world, it's a world of trains. The world's surface was barren in some places. like a desert. The setting of the first and second dream, some parts had marshes and forest. The setting of the third dream and others had snowy mountain ranges. Setting of the fourth dream, each city was a huge train station. As in, a huge station. Imagine like a really big oil rig with architecture similar to the Kowloon's walled city. With the size of an actual city, they were elevated by pillars with stairs coiling around them. The suspension wires ran all around the bottom and the edges of the city. They were embedded in the ground below. The orientation of the wires varied with each city. An example was the station on a cliffside. It had its wires run from the edge of the station to the cliffside, and others from the edge of the city to the sides and bottom, keeping it attached. All the stations had huge hangar-like openings for the trains, accompanied by rails that stretched several highways wide. They were called harbors. Not the entire station, just the part where the trains came and went. The stations were still called stations, though it was common for people to just call the stations without saying the word station, like this is X instead of this is X station. Moving on, the stations were so big to the point that they had highways to connect one part of the station to the other. Additionally, the stations had trains. They had smaller trains that ran from one sector to the other, like the highways. It was literally a city on 4 pillars. Well, 4 pillars and several suspension cables. The higher levels of the stations I saw looked very Victorian, like Victorian age stuff, while the levels below looked more mechanical, but nonetheless populated with apartments, businesses, marketplaces, etc., all illuminated by the lights on the metal ceiling and natural light if you were near the edges of the station. The harbor of the station I saw was similar to King's Cross Station, with a translucent window arch, but the panels were more dusty and worn out. Additionally, the dream was detailed enough to include named stations. There were definitely more, but these were the ones that were mentioned. The Ark, mentioned, seen in Dream 1 and 2. Cliffside, mentioned, and briefly seen in Dream 3. Timekeeper's Peak, mentioned in Dream 3. Rustville, mentioned in Dreams 1, 2, and 3. Blue Guardian, mentioned in Dream 3. Moving on to the trains, they were called colonies, and they were almost as huge as the stations themselves. Of course, being smaller, but each train was several meters high, as tall as a small skyscraper, and was able to accommodate the size of a small city. Each car was a different town or village, and they were connected together by massive tube-like structures, similar to what you'll see on a commuter train or a subway station. The towns made up the sides of the trains, with the small apartments attached or sticking out the sides. Pipes and maintenance systems ran like roots all over the train and its cars. They even had some sort of street network. No highways, though. The biggest of the trains accommodated were 2-way roads. Each time a train arrived, the process of getting on board was like an immigration check. You had to have several documents just to get on board. As for the boarding, uploading, unloading process, the train stopped at one station for about 4 months before going again. During that time, the train would resupply, trade, and provide resources to the station. The trains, too, were named, but no individual train was named. Only the classes they belonged to. Named classes are as follows. Yes, I actually remembered these because they sounded cool. Wanderer class. Train that was seen in Dream 1 and 2. Citadel class. Mentioned in Dreams 1 and 2. Nameless class. Mentioned in Dreams 1 and 2. Fortitude class. Mentioned in Dreams 1 and 2. Moving to resource collection, there were several stations that provided resources, and having its own scouting, harvesting parties looking for different stuff. One in Forest harvested wood and metal, and another in the Arctic harvested all sorts of minerals, but all of them had to gather food and water. Those who were universal. The stations used the trains to conduct trade, both with the train and with other stations. If they wanted to deliver something directly to another station, they used airships. The airships themselves were nothing special, but it was the people on board that were. The crew of the airships wore attire similar to that of Victorian traders, or the assassins from Assassin's Creed Unity Syndicate, except for the fact that they had a jetpack. The jetpacks looked like small Horton Ho 229s that were attached to the user's back. The wigs of the jet were capable of folding like the wings of an F-14 Tomcat. They did this for speed. Or, if the packs were to be stored, apparently there's also a thing called Sky Raiders that board the airship and steal cargo before taking off again. The jetpacks were sometimes used to pursue the raiders if they tried to escape. According to sources from the Dream, being a trader was a dangerous line of trade. Yes, they made this pun. It was in the third Dream. I apologize for that. My air kicked on and I wanted to turn it off before continuing because it's pretty noisy in here. Okay, continuing on. As for politics, there wasn't much explaining in terms of politics because dreams being dreams, and Dream me already knew what was going on, even though real me didn't actually know, and thus I had no idea how politics worked. However, there was definitely an ongoing war somewhere. I remember having a huge portion of the combat being done in the air with massive ironclad airships. There were ground forces too, but they weren't really expanded on as much as the airships were. Yes, the airships had classes, but only one was mentioned, the Charger class, or Destroyer, mentioned and seen in Dream 4. Moving on to the Dreams. Dreams 1 and 2 consisted of 2 parts, thus the 1 and 2 part 1 consisted of me driving along the roads inside the trains. The road I was driving on was on the side of the train itself. It had a tube protecting the inside so that the cars don't get blown away. I was driving on that road, then back inside the train via an opening in the side. After entering the train, I was now driving on an elevated road. Below the road was a slum community with a big central marketplace. The roof of the train car was a circular window that functioned as a clock, with big brass arms extended from the center. They had a different color from the gears so that they were easier to see. If a resident wanted to know what time it was, they simply had to look up. I kept driving till I reached the surface, which showed the Victorian aesthetics I talked about. But in the central town square was the clock window. From the bottom it looked flat, but seeing it on the surface, the center was more like a signpost, with signs pointing to which street was which. The arms of the clock was still visible, but it was under a glass pane. But at least at the time was still visible if you looked at it from above. Part 1 ended with me just about to take the turn to leave the town square, but this dream gave me insight into how the trains functioned. Part 2 gave me info on how both the world and the trains. Part 2 started off with me looking out the window and seeing the world outside. It was a desert with a few structures sticking out, some abandoned and some active. One had a small airship anchored near it. In summary, Part 2 was mostly considered of me wandering about in the train's residential area, then to the so-called harbors, where the dream ended. This part was the part where I got info dumped on how the stations worked, what the train classes were, how to get on board, get off, the names of the stations, etc. In that part, I remember the story being that I was migrating to a new station from my old one, and I took the huge train to get there. I wanted to get everything right for a smooth trip and processing, hence why I got info dumped. Most of the details I learned were already explained in the paragraphs above. Dream 3. This dream happened around a week after Dreams 1 and 2. It was the one that explained to me how interstation trade worked, as I was placed in the crew of a trade airship. Since again, most of the things I learned I already info dumped above, I'm just going to summarize it. It starts with the crew boarding the ship, along with several other crews assigned to different stations. But our destination was Cliffside, since it was the closest to our station. Sadly, I didn't know that station's name, nor did I find out. This was also the moment where another crew member, and the one I mentioned. The next few moments were the launching of the airship through an opening roof and just somewhat smooth sailing. But the reason I explained the jetpacks and the Sky Raiders was because of this dream. We got attacked by another small airship that boarded ours and took a few cities of our cargo. It took a few crates of our cargo. My apologies. So we decided to retaliate. Jetpacks came into play here as I, along with some others, were outfitted with one. We launched off of the airship and gave chase to our attackers, though the airship was faster and going in a straight line when compared to the jetpack. The Raiders' airship was busy with maneuvering to get away. We fought in both ranged combat when they tried to hit us with anti-air guns, as well as ranged onboard fighting and melee combat when we eventually boarded the ship and decided for close quarters combat. I remember a specific moment where I took off the jetpack and used it as some sort of big rocket-propelled boomerang club. I mean, it did hit a guy, but I was surprised it didn't break. Afterwards, we reclaimed our stuff by counterboarding the airship and went on our merry way. The dream then cut to when we finally reached Cliffside. It ended right when we were about to land the ship in its hangar. Dream 4. This one was the shortest among all the dreams and occurred around a month after Dream 3. This dream explained more about what was going on in the world. More specifically, it focused on the war that was going on. Our strike group consisted of 3 units of the previously mentioned Charger-class destroyer airships. The mission assigned to us was the assault of an artillery outpost on an excavated mountain top. We were to charge headfirst into the artillery position so that they focused fire on us instead of the troops below. The airships that were used were heavily modified, with more armor since, according to the brief, the artillery position had been bombarding us for months. And since big ships couldn't get through, they hoped we could. The airships were loaded, and in a moment we were off. The landscape below was beautiful, as it was chaotic. There was a battle shore, but the terrain was a mix of desert, sand, grass, and snow. Those 3 collided at the base of a mountain range. The desert intersected the snowy grass at the base, with some even on the face of the mountain range itself, creating a unique mix of sand and snow. Circling back, I remember everyone being nervous. I don't blame them. Nor, and dream me, you'd be insane if you weren't nervous. You were assaulting a fortified position that even the big ships couldn't deal with. What could you, or a 3-destroyer fleet, could do? A lot. The answer was a lot. I remember the battle starting when we were intercepted by a few squadrons of enemy planes. The planes looked similar to World War I planes, but some had more modern World War II designs. The scenery was chaotic. Bullets were flying everywhere. The airships were starting to smoke, and sparks from countless ricochets flew left and right. We defended for as long as we could as we approached the mountain range at a low altitude, racing at full throttle before the fighters shot us out of the sky. We eventually reached the mountain base, and all 3 ships pulled up as hard as they could, each trailing back a thick layer of black smoke because of how much damage we sustained. And still the bullets flew. We eventually reached the top and delivered our payloads. Several positions went in flames. I remember feeling thrilled because we did it. We did what the other couldn't. However, the damage was still being taken. The fighters were still in the air, and we held our ground. The dream ended with a plane dropping an aerial torpedo at my airship, exploding at the starboard side, causing me and the crew inside to be shaken. I remember passing out with ringing in my ear, slowly starting to recover, but that was then when I suddenly woke up. That was where it ended, leaving the fate of the 3-destroyer fleet unknown. After each of those dreams happened, I quickly wrote down all that I remembered from the dreams, and thanks to its uniqueness, I was able to remember a lot. I also remembered to write the notes almost immediately after waking up, so as to not get hit by the "what was the dream about again" event, since I already wanted to remember those experiences and all that lore. I'm still fascinated on how those forest dreams were so jam-packed with lore. And that is the end of the entry. TLDR for people that have ADHD and don't want to listen to this long story. I had a dream about train cities that stopped at stations that were also cities. It was so intricate and lore-filled, and I still can't believe it's a dream, or several dreams to this day. And I wanted to provide a summary myself because I just found this one fascinating. Like he said, the lore in this dream, there's so much so much going on, and there's so many different avenues and nuances to these dreams. It's almost like a mini saga or episodic event, and I've had these myself with the tower dream and the endless mall dreams and stuff. Almost like a reoccurring kind of dream that just kind of happens. Almost like a crazy show. And the thing that fascinated me most was his details of the trains, and about how they were so large that they were basically like miniature cities. And the stations themselves were vast and massive. Or basically like they were cities, but they were stations that the trains stopped at. Almost like a station city / city in a way. And just about all of the like commerce and all of the industry that happens throughout these areas and the wars that happened. It's almost like a very detailed like world building dream that the user or this person was talking about in his dream. But just like the first like 2 or 3ish dreams, just like the world building and the lore and all of this that builds up to the war in the third dream, or the fourth technically, but the last dream that he had talked about, he or she talked about, was the war scene, and the trying to get to the mountain range while the enemy ships were bearing down on them, and basically ending in a cliffhanger when their ship gets struck. And so it was a very interesting dream, and I really enjoyed reading this one. I asked him if I could put it on my channel, because it's just a fascinating dream. And I like reading other people's dreams. I like reading my own, but I also love reading other people's, because it gives me insight on what they dream and like what they experience in their own dreams and stuff. But I'm just going to leave this one here. I hope you enjoyed this one, because this one's fairly long. And I will see you next time. Thank you for listening. You have a good day.